Did you know that in the last 5 years, in California, we have lost over 25% of our vineyards and grape growing land? It's been fallowed. Unfortunately, California wine is not doing well, and this trend is still going on. Our guest today is Stuart Spencer, who's on the ground and is seeing all this trend developing. He's seeing what's happening to California wine and winemakers and vineyards. Today, he'll tell us what's going on. Is this trend continuing? And is there a way to turn things around? I'm Siam Akarami. Welcome to California Insider. Stuart, it's great to have you back, and welcome back.
I'm happy to be here and happy to share what's going on in California wine.
You know, something that's been happening in your space, we looked at some data and about 25% of the land has been fallowed over the last 5-6 years in the vineyard space here. What's happening? You think this trend is continuing, right?
When you look at the state of the California wine industry, we've had over 30 years of positive growth, and beginning around 2018, it started to kind of flatten out. And then we saw a spike during the pandemic, and then over the last 3 years, we've seen year after year declining sales and shipments into the marketplace. And so when we look at the data, we are shipping about 17% less wine than we were 3 years ago. And so that has had significant ramifications on the whole industry. And we can get into greater detail on some of those other effects. But at the end of the day, we're shipping less wine, and simultaneously, there's a kind of a global oversupply of wine. So the U.S. is the number one market in the world for value and volume, and so everyone is targeting us, and there's a lot of cheap foreign wine showing up in California and the U.S. that's undercutting California grape growers.
So what's happening to the grape growers? Are they going to cut back or?
Well, we are experiencing one of the most difficult times in the history of California wine grapes and the California wine industry. I was talking with one of our 80-year-old growers the other day, and he says, I don't ever remember it being this challenging. He said, there was always a point where, someone would come and pick up your grapes. You may not make money on it, you may lose a little bit of money, but at least you sold your grapes. And last year, we had probably 400,000 to 500,000 tons of grapes go unharvested. The year before, we had several 100,000 tons go unharvested. And it's looking like, again, this year, there's going to be another 400,000 to 500,000 tons potentially left on the vine without a home. And that is forcing all our farmers to make some really hard decisions as they move forward with their family and their businesses.
And what kind of decisions do they have to make?
It's not like some businesses, on the wine side, if you're off 10% in sales, it's significant. But when you're a small farmer and you have zero sales, that is huge. And so, they're looking at all sorts of alternatives. They're removing vineyards and looking at alternative crops where it's a viable solution. They're looking at their family operation, and is the next generation interested in walking into this? And in some cases, or in many cases, it's not the case. And so they're having to look at, putting the farms up for sale and looking at other sources of income to sustain themselves. And farming has become a real challenge here in California, and it's having significant impacts throughout our community.
So you said 400,000 to 500,000 tons of grapes. So they were sitting on the tree and nobody wanted them.
Yeah, basically they couldn't find anyone to buy them. So they spent all year farming them. They irrigated them. They did all the cultural practices. They farmed it in a sustainable manner, and they were hoping to find a buyer at the end of the day. But our largest buyers are just not showing up. As I've talked about before, they're instead going overseas and bringing in cheap bulk imports that are replacing California-grown grapes.
Can you tell us more? What's happening? Why is this happening?
It's a good question. I think there's several things happening. One, it's an economic decision where they can buy cheap wine overseas, and they're bringing it in and importing it. The second piece of that is that our federal government is actually subsidizing it through a loophole in what we call the federal duty drawback program that allows much of this imported bulk wine to enter the U.S. market virtually tax-free without having to pay the alcohol taxes that I do as a small producer and as the other domestic producers do. And so this has created a real market distortion and incentive to source wine from overseas instead of sourcing locally here. And it's the combination of those factors that are just pushing the growers out of business here.
So winemakers from here go and buy the wine from other countries and bring them here, or is it the other competition from across the globe that are coming in?
So it's all the above. So you've got two kind of markets. You've got the bulk wine market, which is they're shipping the wine from Australia and Chile primarily right now, and New Zealand. It comes in these big bladders and tankers that get shipped halfway across the world. And that wine is coming in really cheap, and they can source it overseas for $2 to $3 a gallon, and then get $1.07 back in their alcohol tax refunds. And so that is part of the problem. You've also got the bottled wine market too, where there's bottled wine shipments coming into the U.S. are up 5% through the first 6 months of 2025. And every wine producing country in the world is targeting the U.S. wine market. The number one country is Italy. That's the number one imports into this country, then France, and they're being supported through their federal government and European unions, subsidizing the grape production over there so they can come in at lower costs, and then we can produce it here for.
So when the bulk comes in, does it get mixed with other products, or does it get sold as?
Yeah, this is one of the real frustrating things, is that a lot of this bulk wine can be blended with California wine up to 25% and then labeled American. And this is a problem we see across other agricultural products, and in the wine sector, I personally feel it's very deceptive. And this could be fixed by our federal government, but they've neglected to do that. We've been pushing as grape growers in California to get this fixed, but it's deceiving the consumer into believing that the wine is actually coming from California, and it can contain up to 25% foreign wine.
And you mentioned that the imports have gone up by 5%.
Yes, first 6 months of 2025, bottled wine imports are up 5% by volume. Bulk wine imports are up 17%. So this is what's really frustrating, is we've got lots of growers trying to sell grapes. We have a lot of wineries that have excess wine that are trying to sell their wine on the bulk market in California, yet the largest wine companies are continuing to bring more wine in from overseas instead of choosing to purchase locally grown grapes.
Is it because California wine is more expensive? We've been told that this is, and if you compare the numbers.
Well, it is more expensive when you factor in that they can get the duty drawback refunds and subsidy the federal government is providing. It's also coming from places like South America, who doesn't have the same labor requirements as we do. They don't have the same environmental requirements as we do. They don't live in the same kind of regulatory world we do, and so they're able to produce at a cheaper price than we are able to do so here in California.
What about compared to French wines and European wines? California wines are a lot more expensive, right?
Well, the European wines is a whole nother story. So the European Union produces about 60% of all wine in the world. They have continued to see declining consumption, which we can talk about in a minute. But what's really frustrating for us as California producers is they have a tremendous amount of subsidies and non-tariff trade barriers that prop up their wine sector. So a couple of things that I think are worth pointing out. One is a process called crisis distillation. So when they have excess wine, the governments are coming in and buying it up instead of letting these market correct itself. Secondly, they spend about 500 million euros supporting the planting of new vineyards. And there's an audit that was done by the European Commission to look and to see if this is being done for competitive purposes. And basically what the audit said is that every project that was asked for money got money. And so this is perpetuating a global oversupply because they're not allowing the market to correct itself in a fast enough manner to bring it into balance. And then third, you also see that there's tremendous amount of market support they're doing. I was recently looking through Wine Spectator magazine. It's a leading wine journal magazine too, and their April issue had 15 full-page ads paid for by the European Union and the Italian government. Each advertisement costs $40,000 a piece, so it's over $500,000 just in one magazine and one issue that is being supported by the Italian government and the European Union to prop up Italian wines in the U.S. marketplace.
So you're saying they're really investing in this industry by subsidies and marketing, and we are not doing much about it?
No, we're just opening the doors so they can come on in and take our market share. And in the last 20 years, U.S. wines have lost about 11.5% of the market share while we've been in a growing market, which is really frustrating.
What about the tariffs?
has that helped you guys?
Well, the tariffs are very complicated, and I think when we look at the whole trade situation we've been dealing with for the past year, we would love to see a little more precision in how this is being done. And you need to be looking at each commodity and each product individually and coming up with trade negotiation and trade policies that are going to benefit that. So we were just talking about the European subsidies. And the problem with the European subsidies is that they are continuing to overproduce. It is harming their own growers themselves. There was a supermarket chain in Europe that is selling wine cheaper, a bottle of wine cheaper than you can buy a can of soda or a bottle of water. And this is not sustainable for anyone. It's shifting all the negotiating strength away from the farmers, away from the wineries, to these large supermarket chains. We're seeing the same thing here across the U.S. and in the whole agriculture sector is the farmer is bearing all the risk, yet these pieces in the supply chain are getting all the profit from it. And it's the same thing in the wine sector, and it's leading to this oversupply situation that needs to be addressed and corrected.
So when you said the farmers have these 400 to 500,000 tons of grapes sitting on the trees, what happens to them? Do they just go bad, or do they?
Well, it depends on the individual farmer. In some cases, there are a lot of vineyards around that are just abandoned throughout California this year. And, these are problematic because they will be spreading disease, and pest populations will build up, and all sorts of problems can come from it. Some of the farmers, if they're going to continue to try and farm them, will just go through and harvest them and drop them on the ground. Some of them will just let them sit there rotting on the vine. You can probably go out throughout California and find vineyards that still have grapes sitting on them from last year that never got picked. And they're going to look like a little dried up raisin right now, but we're likely to see that again this year.
Some people say, why don't you guys make raisin from this grape?
Well, the challenge, wine grapes are very specific, and raisin grapes are specific too. And wine grapes have seeds in it. It's a small berry with seeds in it, and nobody really wants to eat seeds when they're eating a raisin. So that is not an option. We are continuing to look at alternative products. My colleague at the Winegrape Commission is, looking at juicing grapes and ways you can turn wine grapes into juice and use it in all sorts of things. But that's at a very small level, a very artisan level. It's not happening in a very large scale volumes to help benefit the entire industry.
Now, is the decline in this industry because of younger people not drinking wine? There's a lot of reports on that.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. One, when you look at decline, we're actually, when you look at wine sales by value, it's actually kind of up. It's the volume side of it that is down. I think the young people get scapegoated for a lot of things right now. In my experience, young people come of wine drinking age more in their 30s when they start to settle down. They move from going from bars and clubs into buying a home and settling down with a family, and wine becomes more of lifestyle. We've seen this across generations, and I'm hopeful that the younger generation will take to wine too. I think when you look at the Gen Z generation, I think part of the pandemic and their isolation has slowed their maturity into adulthood, and so I think that's impacted their interest in wine and food. But when I look at my children, I have two kids, one's 22 and one's 25, they eat and drink way better than I ever did. Both of them enjoy wine, and I joke, they're not afraid to go out and buy a $7 coffee. So I think this bodes well as they, get into the workplace, get jobs and settle down, that, they're going to be engaged wine drinkers later in life too.
As you remember, we've covered an alleged scheme in Arcadia's city council where the Chinese Communist Party members were trying to get people elected. There was a recent case in San Diego, a couple of military members that got indicted because of sending information to China. And FBI is warning that every 10 hours, they have one new case of counterintelligence against China-related activities opened. But it's not just the counterintelligence attacks. Businesses in California have been impacted significantly. Billions of dollars have been lost because of IP theft. That's why we've decided to inform Californians in depth about what's going on. And we are inviting Joshua Phillip, who's an award-winning journalist from Epoch Times, who has been investigating the Chinese Communist Party's activities across the US for the last 2 decades, to come on a live event in our studio in Irvine and also in San Diego.
I had a lot of people threatening to kill me. I realized that if I don't cover it, nobody else was. One of the greatest threats our country faces would have gone unreported. I decided, yeah, I'm willing to die for this. And if they kill me, it'll make it better known.
So we're hosting an event with Joshua on September 24th at 11:30 in San Diego. It's going to be a lunch. We have a link below, you can RSVP. We're also going to have another event in Orange County and Irvine in our studio on September 25th on Thursday at 5:30. And he will also do Q&A, so you can ask him a lot of questions about what he has seen. Most of the people that attended our last event were surprised by the stories about how the Chinese Communist Party is working here. We would love to see you here at these events. Now let's go back to the interview. Some people say that the California wine is overpriced, it's very expensive. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think a lot of that is, there's a bit of misinformation on it. And I think one of the challenges we face is that general public looks at wine through the lens of Napa Valley. Napa Valley is an incredible place that makes incredible wines, but it's very expensive, and the wines are very expensive there. But they only produce 4% of California wine. There are incredible values of California wine all across the state, in places like Lodi, where you can come and have incredible wine at very fair prices. And so I think that's part of the misconception out there, is just it's a perception thing. Secondly, a lot of people experience wine through tourism and visitation and going to wineries, and the cost of visiting California has gotten very expensive. And so people are spending more when they visit wine country on the hotels, they're spending more on their eating out, they're spending more on the travel, the tasting fees that have gone up. And so at the end of the day, there's less money left over for actually walking home with a bottle of wine. And I think that's impacting our industry as well.
How much of this space is agriculture and how much of it is the wine supply?
One of the things that I think is special about wine and separates it from other beer and spirits is that wine is 100% agriculture. It is 100% grown. It is 100% plant-based. And we live and die by each season and the weather and the crops we get and produce. And so that's a critical piece of it. And I think that's why it's important to support our local farms, because they need this support. And without this market for the grapes, they're going to have to turn to other things or abandon their vineyards and their farming operations.
Is that happening in your area?
Well, I think what we're seeing across California and in my area is that, yes, the smaller farms are getting pushed out of business. Their margins have been squeezed. And it's not just in the last 2 years, it's been squeezed for some time. It's a phenomenon we're seeing across all of agriculture as the growers continue to get squeezed and the farmers, it's pushing out the smaller producers. And, the concern I have as someone whose life is in agriculture is that less people in our communities that are connected to agriculture, the less concern they have for how their food is grown, where it comes from, and supporting local. They are disconnected from that. And as we lose our family farms, as we lose our small farmers, there's going to be more and more of that disconnection, and it's not going to serve our country well.
Why does that concern you?
I think when you look at the wine sector, which I'm very familiar with, we are all rural based. And so when you look at the Central Valley of California, the agricultural economy is the engine that keeps it going and keeps it healthy. And when agriculture struggles, the whole Central Valley struggles, the whole community struggles. There's less money available for our trucking companies, there are irrigation companies, from our fertilizer companies, from the field workers that are doing the work. There's less work to go around. This has tremendous impacts as it goes through the supply chain. One of the interesting things as you look at wine grapes in particular is that it is one of the more value-added products. So when you take a ton of grapes and turn it into wine, you're adding a tremendous amount of value to that product. In 2022, there was an economic impact report put together by the California Association of Wine Grape Growers and the Wine Institute. That report demonstrated that for every dollar spent on a ton of grapes, it generated over $26 of economic output in California and $62 across the United States. And so when I look at these bulk imports that are coming in the last 5 years, there's been the equivalent of 1.7 million tons of bulk imports replacing California grown grapes. That equates to over $20 billion in lost economic output for the state of California. And that is jobs from all sorts of people, that's all sorts of economic activity, and it harms everyone.
So if the imported portion was not coming in as much, we could save this industry, we could save these farmlands.
Yeah,
is that enough to save?
There are always going to be challenges, but I think we as a country need to be investing in our communities and investing locally. And the imports, we've seen it over the last 20 years. Every time the price starts to come up in California for grapes, you see a surge of bulk imports coming in, driving the price back down. We're still seeing that right now. It's really, I find it morally reprehensible, but I'm not in a position to make those decisions. But it's having a huge impact on the health of our communities.
And you guys in the farming space, you have a pretty close community. Can you tell us about that?
Farmers are a very tight-knit community, and I think they are a foundational piece of our culture. They look out for each other, they take care of each other, and they take care of their community. It's part of their value system. A farmer doesn't just think in 3 months or 6 months, they're thinking long term. We have many families in Lodi that are 5th and 6th generation farming families. I work with a family called the Morfry Ranches. They just celebrated their 170th year of farming in California, going back to the 1850s. And to think of any one business being around 170 years in California is remarkable. And it's that generational legacy that continues to invest in your community. And you look at things differently. When you have a long-term view, you make better decisions in what's in the best interest of your community, what's in the best interest of your family. And we all benefit from that long-term view. And we need to see more of that.
Can you give us some examples for people that may not know how it works in your community? How do people treat each other, interact with each other?
I'll give you a very personal one. Next week it'll be 19 years that my dad passed away, and we have a vineyard and winery, and he passed away in the middle of harvest. And it was a challenging time for my family, but I had to pick grapes 3 days later, and the rest of the community stood up and helped us get through that. We had friends that helped pick our grapes. We had friends that helped process some of our wine. We had friends that did the trucking for us. We had people that just said, whatever you need, let me know and we'll do it. And that kept our business afloat and got us through the next day. And it's that sense of community input that really drives rural communities and farming communities, and it keeps me coming back to do it year after year.
And did they just offer it themselves? They just showed up?
They just show up and they just do it. They just offer. They don't expect anything in return. It's what you do. You take care of your community. You take care of your friends. You take care of your neighbors. It's how it works, and it's a value set that until you're experiencing it first time, you really can't appreciate it. And just last year, we had another one of our growers whose wife passed away right in the middle of harvest, and community stood up. Nobody asked for any recognition or anything, but one of the growers supplied the picking crews, another grower supplied the trucks, another grower supplied the harvesters, and they got it done and kept him afloat through this difficult time. And this type of stuff happens all the time. They invest in the community. We have our local schools and FFA programs and all of that. They're constantly investing in it. We have a vineyard at one of our local high schools that one of our grape growers just takes care of. He made sure it got planted and is taken care of year after year. And he goes out there by himself. He's not asking for any recognition, but he makes sure it gets taken care of. And it's these kind of things that helps the community grow, and it introduces these students to agriculture. There's another program I'd like to talk about too, and we've been involved in creating this pathways into our industry for our local students. So we live in a very diverse community. In Stockton, to the south of us, is a town, a city of 300,000, Lodi 60,000, and we're working through a nonprofit called San Joaquin A+ to create pathways into our industry. And so we have high school interns, students working at wineries and working at vineyards during the summer months when they're off. And it's giving them a taste of what work is like and what our industry is like. We know in our community that 70% of the kids that grow up in San Joaquin County stay in San Joaquin County. So if our industry is going to be healthy, if agriculture is going to survive, we need qualified workforce. And by introducing these kids at 15, 16, 17 to our industry, we are all going to benefit from it. I've got some vintners that have been very supportive of doing that and taken a lead on it. Rodney Tipton at Acquiesce Winery has taken the lead in doing that, and just, he doesn't ask for recognition, but he just thinks it's the right thing to do, and it is the right thing to do, and it's helping these kids experience our industry and get some skills along the way.
You mentioned a couple of cases where people come to help each other during harvest. What is it like to do harvest when you have a catastrophe?
Well, harvest is kind of organized chaos no matter what, because you're dealing with a lot of factors. You're dealing with people for one, and you're dealing with Mother Nature for two. But when my dad passed away, we had to just do it. You just have to do what you need to do. You can't sit around and feel sorry for yourself or worry about it. You just have to do what needs to be done. And that is also a value and a work ethic that permeates the farming community. It's like when stuff has to get done, it needs to get done. When the crop needs to be harvested, it needs to be harvested. And you don't wait for the right time to do it. You do it when you have to, and feel bad about your situation when you have time.
So it's like you have to get it done.
You have
and
to
there's
do
no
it.
other options.
There's no other options. Sometimes you can wait a few days to pick grapes. Sometimes there's a storm coming in or weather's changing, and you need to get it done as quickly as you can. And that's what I admire about our community, is they rise to the occasion when the time is necessary and get things done. I have a great relationship with a family we work with, and it's very much, they'll help me out when I need help, and then I help them out when they need help. And it's just how it gets done. It's mutual trust. It's just a set of values. It's a relationship. You just take care of each other, and we all benefit from that. And none of us can do anything by ourselves. We all like to think we're invincible and can do anything, but farming is not one of those things you can do by yourself. And so you need the support. We need our farm workers out in the field. They are a critical piece of our business. We need our trucking companies. We need our neighbors. We're all in this together, and we all kind of rise together and we all fall together. So that's why it's important to support your local farms.
How did you learn that you need to do this long term?
I just grew up in the business, and you get immersed in it. It's a culture. That's part of what's missing out there. Is there's this incredible culture within a farming community about helping each other. And when you step into it as an outsider, you immediately start seeing it and feeling it. And then you want to be a part of that too. And if you come into it with a very selfish attitude, about a me first thing, you're not going to be welcomed in the same way. There's basically two types of peepers. There's takers and givers, and farmers are givers. And if you come in with a take it attitude, the culture is going to push you away. So we need more givers in this world.
There are some concern about the environmental side of farming.
Yeah, so this is another great link between community and culture. So we started an integrated pest management program in Lodi back in 1991, right after our organization got started. And it was about just introducing environmental friendly farming practices like beneficial insects and cover cropping. And that program grew from the ground up and became the first certified sustainable wine growing program in the United States. This past year, we had over 72,000 acres certified sustainably grown under Lodi rules in the state of California. About half of that is in Lodi and half of it is outside of Lodi. It's been a model that's emulated around the world. And the beauty of it is that it is developed by farmers for farmers with input from environmentalists, input from scientists to create a very workable, practical program to improve your farming practices. And most people don't know this. Most people don't want to understand this, but we have over 150 different practices, things we have to do. Everything from irrigation management to irrigation distribution uniformity to creating a habitat plan to creating a whole ecosystem management plan. It's a holistic approach to farming that most people don't understand or even appreciate, but it's this piece of it that is often overlooked. And Many of us in the ag sector, get frustrated because the disconnected public just thinks we're all, spraying pesticides and just trying to maximize yields. But the reality is we're all independent farmers. We're all small farming operations. We raise our kids in our vineyards and our farms. We're not going to do anything there that's going to harm them, where we raise our families. And so we are always trying to do what's in the best interest of our community and of our farm. The other part of that too is when you think about 5th and 6th generation farming families that have been farming this piece of ground for 150 years, they're not going to want to destroy their dirt. That is, their soil is their bank account. And so they want to take care of their soil, they want to take care of their farm because they want the next generation to continue farming it as well.
What about the water use? Some people have said you guys are using too much water and then there's a lot of fruit that get wasted in this process.
Well, I think there's several pieces to that. First, wine grapes in general are a very water efficient crop. They use very little water compared to other crops. Secondly, in California and in Lodi in particular, we have ample sources of water. Most of the water in California flows through the Lodi region and out to the San Joaquin River Delta. The challenge California faces is not a water issue, it's a water storage issue, and we need to really invest in more storage issues because we have our wet years and all the water runs out to the ocean, then we have our dry years to get us through that. And so water is something we're always going to be fighting about, but it's important to be managing our water in a much more efficient and sustainable way at a very holistic level.
Before we move on to the rest of this interview, I want to share with you some key headlines from our newspaper, Epoch Times, this week in California. Governor Newsom has deployed the California Highway Patrol to help the 10 top cities in California with crime. As a part of this effort, there's going to be some task force that's going to help us with homeless cleanups. For a while, retail theft in California has been puzzling to a lot of people. Ventura County was able to catch a ring of thefts that were hitting Home Depots. Interesting story from Northern California. The Marin County is actually building homeless shelter for the ranchers' workers. Point Reyes National Park, some of the ranches are not ranching anymore. As a result of it, their workers could become homeless. Marin County is preparing a shelter for them. There is a boom in California with backyard housing and apartments. 26% of the new permits issued in California are going to ADUs or granny flats. Unfortunately, UCLA lost its top ranking among the public schools in the US. And if you'd like to check out the Epoch Times newspaper, we not only have California news, but national, international, China, and unique content in mind and body space, life and tradition, different interesting sections. You can check out the newspaper. We have a special link for you for $1 a week, and we'll leave the link below. And let us know what you think of the newspaper.
Do you think with these changes that are happening in the wine market, with these challenges you guys are facing, do you think these farming communities are under risk?
Yeah, I think they're under tremendous risk. It's not just the wine grape sector, it's the entire agriculture sector. And as that ag economy struggles, the whole community struggles, the whole rural community struggles. There's less money available for everyone. The Central Valley of California is one of the most agriculturally rich places in the world. We have a very resilient group of farmers that can do and grow anything, but we need the support of the community, we need the support of our state and federal government, and we need fair trade so that we can compete on a global stage fairly.
Now, you mentioned that if these communities are at risk, is it that these lands could get sold to bigger companies, or is it that they will get fallowed?
Well, it's going to be all the above. I think some of it will be bought up by larger companies. One of the interesting things we see in the wine sector is over many decades, you'll have institutional investors jump into the wine sector. It never seems to work out. They don't have the set of values that I just talked about and the long-term vision, and they just kind of mess up the industry. What we're likely to see is, a lot of ground getting fallow that's not going to be farmed unless something changes, and you're going to see people having to sell their property at discounted rates from what it was worth a few years ago.
Now, Stuart, to fix this, what does it take? What does it take to turn this around?
The first thing is we need real support from our federal government and state government. And when I say real support, I don't mean we need subsidies like the Europeans. What I mean is they need to fix some of these rules that have made it imbalanced for California grape growers and farmers. The duty drawback issue I talk about. Last March, myself and a group of growers went back to Washington, D.C., and we sat down with congressmen, many of them, and told them our situation here, and yet nothing happens. And we did have one, our own congressman, Congressman Harder, who actually he's on the Appropriation Committee, and he put an amendment in there to defund this duty drawback. Well, he couldn't get any support from it. We had a big liquor company kind of lobbying all the other Appropriations Committee members that didn't want to see this happen. And they don't even make wine, yet they were lobbying it. We had a Republican congressman from the Southern Valley who wouldn't support it. And he has grape growers in his district, and we don't know why he wouldn't support it. But those are the kind of things that need to be fixed. I think secondly, the state of California continues to make things very challenging for anyone that's doing business. I mean, you hear a lot of stories about businesses leaving California. As farmers, we can't leave California. Our ground is here. And so we are not an endless pocket to be picked. We cannot afford, these regulations. In many cases, the ones that are getting pushed down don't even make any sense. They don't have any benefit. And, it is this type of stuff that is just strangling our community. So we need that support.
Can you give us some examples of that?
Well, I'll tell you a personal one. I bought an F550 flatbed Ford a couple of years ago just to, help haul our grapes from the vineyard. We put about 3,000 to 4,000 miles on it a year, mostly at harvest time. I have 5 different permits and licenses I have to get for that one truck. And then I have to get that smog checked 4 times a year. Yet I don't even use it most of the year. So all of this stuff adds up, thousands of dollars in additional fees that I'm paying that aren't accomplishing anything. And then some of this is driven by our Air Resources Board, which is really an unaccountable agency that just creates all sorts of regulations. There's an amendment going through, or a bill going through the state of California right now. It's called the Gate Bill, and they want to permit all gates in California. And it's going to be the responsibility of Cal OSHA to enforce that. So every farm has to have a permit for each gate, which is just unnecessary. And it's these type of things that just continue to drive the cost and the regulation up. And our returns obviously are not going up on the per acre, so we're having to squeeze more and more out of the little money that's being made. And this is what's driving the smaller farmers out of business. At the end of the day, we need our consumers to care about where their food comes from. When I walk into our local Raley's, our local Safeway, our local Target, I'm going to see, floor stacks of foreign wine, floor stacks of this American wine I was talking about. It's ridiculous that stuff is sitting in a grocery store where the farmers shop.
So this is American wine, but it's a foreign wine, but under American brands,
yeah,
right?
Yes, yeah.
Or is this the one that is 25%
It's
juice?
both. So some of it is 100% foreign wine labeled as foreign wine. Some of it is 25% foreign wine labeled as American wine. And some of it is traditional American brands that now a certain bottle or SKU is labeled with a different country.
Is there a way to tell that? Which one is 25%?
Well, I can tell you, I probably know a lot more about looking at wine labels than you do. And some of these labels, it's very hidden to find out where it actually comes from. And so you have to spend a great deal of time actually looking to see where the wine in that bottle actually comes from. And it's intentionally done that way because they don't want you to ask those questions. Our current administration has made a lot of noise over the last year or so about investing in American companies. And we've got the top California wine companies that are offshoring production and bringing in wine from overseas instead of sourcing local grapes. And it'd be really nice if we could get somebody to pay attention in our U.S. trade offices and fix some of these problems, because California grape growers and farmers are going out of business, and the loss of economic output in California and across the U.S. is significant. And we need to see some change there.
Now, you mentioned you don't want subsidies. Why? Why not?
You don't subsidize your way to profitability. You don't subsidize your way to sustainability. You have sustainability with profitability. And, when you subsidize something, you tend to get more of it. So when you subsidize grape production, you get more grape production. We want to compete on a level playing field, but we're competing against countries that are heavily subsidized. So it's not a fair game. it's like a 100-yard dash, and the competition is starting on the 30-yard line, and we're back in the end zone. It's not a fair competition, but the subsidies aren't going to help us. We need support in certain sectors. We need investment in our research institutions. We need investment in U.S. Department of Agriculture. We need investment in pest exclusion and things like that, which need to be done at a federal and state level. But on the daily farm level, we're not going to subsidize our way to profitability.
I'm sure there's a lot of innovators in your space that are looking at the situation and are trying to make things happen.
There's all sorts of innovation. It's the beauty of America. It's a place where anything really is possible, and we've got a very dynamic community that is coming up with different ideas. There's a big push towards no and low alcohol wines right now. We also have producers that are looking at sweet wines, and I read some statistic the other day that's like 40% of consumers like sweet wines and are afraid to say, I don't like this wine because they like a sweet wine, or they're afraid to say I like sweet wines. And so I think we need to recognize that and provide those customers with wines they like. In Lodi, one of the things we're trying to do is make our region more accessible. I talked a little bit about growing Hispanic population in our country and the demographic changes we are going through. We need to make our wineries and our tasting rooms and our wines more accessible to all sorts of people, and we need to meet the customer where they're at. And there is a lot of innovation happening, and we're right in the middle of kind of the worst part of it. And I think when we get to the other side of it, we'll be in a healthier spot, but we could use some help along the way.
Stuart, hopefully next time we talk to you, things have turned around.
Well, we're going to continue making great wine in Lodi, California, and we welcome everyone to come visit us and support us. And we're invested in California, we're invested in our community, and we're going to keep pushing at it to make it work.
Stuart Spencer, Executive Director at Lodi Winegrape Commission. It was great to have you on California Insider.
I was happy to be here and happy to share the story about Lodi growers and just keep drinking California wine.
Let us know what you think about the situation with the wine industry in California. And remember, California Insider, our goal is to bring people together to solve a lot of the problems that the state has and bring enough attention to them. And when you comment, make sure to consider other stakeholders as well. We want to bring everybody together. This is a show for everyone. We look forward to seeing your comments and emails. You can email us at siamak@californiainsider.com. We read all of your emails and comments. I'm Siamak Karami. This is California Insider. We'll see you next time.